Hey folks, Andy the Taxman here. Now over the last 11 months, I've gotten tremendous and positive feedback, emails, ratings, and reviews from many listeners of the show, and I wanted to share a couple of those with you today. I was left a 5-star review from Wrestling With the Truth on Good Pods, and they said, 5 stars, the Taxman is quickly becoming one of Canada's best wrestling historians, thanks to the work that he puts into every episode. While I'll never put myself over as one of Canada's best wrestling historians, I hope to get there one day, and I appreciate the kind words from Wrestling With the Truth. I had a very nice note left on Twitter from @JimmyAdig. He says, good stuff @6_podcast, the Twitter handle for this show. Loving Grappling With Canada. The episode of Gamasing was amazing. Canada does not get enough credit in wrestling. I like the series, bro. You're giving good historical facts. I appreciate that, Jimmy, and I try very, very hard to include as many truthful and factual accounts as I possibly can in every episode, so I appreciate the sentiment. I was left another 5-star review on Podchaser, this one from BC Hunter. He says, Andy is one of the best wrestling historians that Canada has to offer. All episodes are a must-listen for any Canadian wrestling fan, or wrestling fan in general. And I appreciate that because, as everybody knows, this show is not just about Canadian wrestling, but also about wrestling history and what Canada does mean to the rest of the world in the grand scheme of things, which brings me to my last one that I want to read to you all right now. So this one came from Fireside Canada, a tremendous podcast as well. I hope everybody goes and checks that out. This was left on Podchaser as well. He said, 5 stars. My knowledge of wrestling doesn't go much further than childhood favorites like Jake the Snake and Junkyard Dog. And in brackets he says, and now you can guess my age. Nevertheless, I'm captivated by people talking about their passions, and as I listened, I found myself sharing the excitement about an athlete I had never heard of. Next thing I know, I'm watching a 50-year-old TV broadcast of Gene Kiniski battling Japan's Giant Baba, observing the otherwise reserved crowd throwing garbage into the ring, and marveling at Kiniski's talent for being a quote-unquote heel. Enthusiastic, educational, and slightly nostalgic. Give it a listen. And that's really what I'm going for here. A show that appeals to everybody, whether you're a history fan, whether you like Canada, whether you like professional wrestling, whether you just like human interest stories. And that's what I try and bring to you guys every month. I'm incredibly proud of producing a program that features a lot of history, a lot of personal experiences, and a lot of personal stories that appeal to a wide range of people, regardless of just wrestling fans, if you will. And quite frankly, you're going to hear stories on this show that you're never going to hear anywhere else. And isn't that really why we're all here? To learn something? I'm asking for everybody's help right now to keep all of this going. This program takes an exorbitant amount of time physically to produce every month. Little behind the scenes look. Each episode takes me roughly between 30 and 50 total hours to produce, research, coordinate guests, etc., etc. There's also a financial responsibility that I have towards this show. So, this is the perfect time now to help me out and to help produce further episodes and further seasons of Grappling with Canada. If you look at the Linktree link in your show notes, you'll find various ways that you can donate to the podcast. You can choose $5 options and increments on buymeacoffee.com/grappling. You'll also find a link to my PayPal account where I would ask if you are able to donate to the program. And also, if you're listening to this on Good Pods, there is the tip jar function where you can also donate to the program. All of that will continue to help this program grow, to help me out with the research towards the program, and to help provide more in-depth discussion and in-depth historical research on this program that we all love. And for me to continue to provide what I think is a great look into the personal lives of some of the most influential people, not just in Canadian wrestling, not just in wrestling in general, but in Canadian history as well. So once again, I'm asking for your support. Click the link in your show notes for various ways to contribute to the show. And as such, If you do contribute to the show, I'll make sure that I give you a shout out in the next month's episode. So once again, use the Linktree link in this month's show notes to see particular ways on how you can donate to the show. And I really appreciate it in advance, and I look forward to chatting with all of you in regards to that. So thank you for your time, and let's get into today's podcast.
Do you think Patterson intentionally shoved DiBiase into the referee?
He did, and the referee's knocked out right now, and I don't know, let's see what's going to happen now, because there's no referee really in the ring, you might say.
Patterson going down in the tights. Patterson has something around his, what is that?
Breast knuckles, Vince. He's got something like breast knuckles. And wow.
Patterson waylays Pat DiBiase.
He's considered one of the greatest in-ring performers of all time. He's also considered one of the greatest wrestling minds of all time. Today, we look at the incredible life and the incredible legacy left behind as we remember one of wrestling's greats and one of Canadian history's greats, the incomparable Pat Patterson. Hello everyone, and
welcome back
to, but more specifically, welcome to the Season 1 finale of Grappling with Canada. As usual, as it has been throughout the entirety of Season 1, I'm your host, the Taxman. And as you've come to expect, today's episode is going to be a masterclass in some information, in some Canadian history, some Canadian wrestling history, and wrestling history in general. And I cannot wait to get into all of that with you guys tonight. But first, before we get into all that, this is the Season 1 finale. And honestly, this season has been absolutely mind-blowing for me in terms of the reception that you guys have given it. Thank you to everyone who's been listening to the program. I think we now have been heard in over 60 countries worldwide, which is absolutely incredible. So thank you. Thank each and every one of you, more specifically, for checking out the program, for passing it along to your friends. And that's something that I'm going to ask you again to do today. So while you're listening to this program, you're probably on your cellular device or on a computer or in some kind of interweb connected technology. Let your friends and family know that you're listening to Grappling with Canada. I have an absolutely incredible episode for you guys to hear tonight that I'm sure is going to, let's say, change some perspectives, if you will, in terms to our subject matter. And that's something that we've been doing, quite frankly, all season long. So why would we stop now? It's been working. And once again, the response from you guys has been absolutely incredible. So thank you everybody for checking out the program. Speaking of which, if this is your first time checking out the program, welcome. I would highly suggest that you go through the back catalog of the first 11 episodes of Season 1. There you'll find episodes on such people as Stu Hart, Dino Bravo, Gail Kim, Billy Two Rivers, Gene Kiniski, all the way up to our last month's episode on the Monster Ripper Ronda Singh, which was a fantastic episode. And if you have not listened to that one, boy oh boy, you're missing out. So don't hit the pause button on this one. However, after you're done this episode, I would highly suggest that you go back in the archives and check out any of the ones that you have yet to listen to. Specifically, especially that Billy Two Rivers episode. I'm telling you, if you have not listened to that one as well, you are in for a massive treat. So once again, if this is your first time to the program, welcome. Please go through the back catalog. And as well, like I said, please share this program with your friends and family. It would truly mean a lot to myself. Once again, you can find us on any podcasting platform of your choice, whether that be iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, Good Pods. Basically, wherever you buy, sell, trade, barter, or steal your favorite podcasts is exactly where you can find us. Make sure you hit that subscribe or follow button. As well, if you're able to, on your favorite podcasting platform of choice, please leave us a 5-star rating and written review. And if you do that, then I will make sure that I read it on the next available episode. A couple of those I'm going to be reading later on in this episode because some people were very gracious to leave me some 5-star reviews. As usual, the least I can do is to read those on the next available program, which I'm going to do later on in this one. You can find us on Twitter at 6_podcast. You can find us on YouTube, youtube.com/c/6sided-podcast. Even if you listen to this program on your various podcasting platforms of choice, if you can go ahead and subscribe to the YouTube channel, I would very highly appreciate that. We are slowly crawling our way to 1,000 subscribers, so just any little bit helps. So if you guys can go ahead and subscribe on YouTube, it would mean so much to me as well. You can also find us on Facebook. We have a Facebook group, Grappling with Canada. Come on in to join the group. Of note, on the Facebook group, I will always put the next month's episode a week early so you know who it's going to be on. Therefore, you can ask any questions or ask for any clarifications before you are able to hear the program. Essentially gives you a leg up on the competition, if you will. So once again, use that group's search bar on Facebook and search Grappling with Canada. Come in and join the group. As well, you can come and like the Grappling with Canada Facebook page. Once again, use that Facebook pages search bar. Search Grappling with Canada. Come on and give that page a like as well. It would mean so much to me. I want to make mention as well, our Threadless store is coming along very nicely, and thank you to everybody who's been making purchases, and especially thank you to everybody who took advantage of the Black Friday sale. If you missed out on the sale, don't fret, because I'm sure if you're listening to this program right now, there's probably some kind of sale going on as we speak. So, very simply, grapplingwithcanada.threadless.com is where you can pick up some merchandise for this program. Of note, all sales of the classic Grappling with Canada Wrestling logo t-shirt are being donated to the Children's Hospital charity here in Winnipeg, Manitoba. So go ahead and pick up a shirt. It's going to a fantastic cause. And let me know on social media when you purchase a shirt. If you send me a picture of you wearing one or whatever, I'll be sure to repost it via Twitter or on the Facebook group as well. Or if you're in the Facebook group, naturally you could put that up there yourself, and it would be a lot of fun to see anyways. Also want to make mention, there's a few ways that you can support this podcast. Honestly, your support would be greatly appreciated and is needed as we kind of progress into Season 2. Once again, something that I'm going to be talking about a little bit later in this program. So, 3 very simple ways you could do that. You can find all of these on our link tree in the bio of any description of this program, whether that's on YouTube, on Twitter, or on Instagram, instagram.com/grapplingwithcanada. You can find ways to donate to the program, which helps me immensely with the research and procurement of same to make these programs. So 3 very simple ways. There is a PayPal direct donation button that you can click on. You can also donate on buymeacoffee.com/grappling. And you can also use the tip jar function on Good Pods. Anything that you guys donate to the program would be very much appreciated, and It will all help me make this program as good as I can, and that would be very much appreciated. And honestly, anything that is derived from the t-shirt sales and all that goes right back into this program as well. So any help from you guys would be greatly appreciated. So once again, check out the Linktree link in the bio or description, wherever you are finding this program, and you will find some ways to help support the show and help support me kind of making this show progress in season 2. Because I got a lot of fantastic ideas. It's going to be a lot of work, but it's going to be a lot of fun. And we are going to be opening up a lot more eyes to not only Canada, not only Canada's contribution to wrestling history, but Canadian history as well. And naturally, professional wrestling history. So we kind of are covering all the bases as we usually do with this program. Now, the reason that we are all here tonight to discuss the life and legacy of Pat Patterson. And I can think of no better way to kickstart this program with a little classic Pat Patterson audio. So I'm going to play a promo clip from Pat Patterson, and on the other side, we are going to kick this thing off right. Please enjoy.
Wrestling spectacular will be some 22 outstanding professional wrestlers, including handsome Jimmy Valiant meeting the 8th wonder of the world in Andre the Giant. Scheduled as well, 4 of the outstanding mighty midget wrestlers on the card. Ivan Putski, anyone who's anything in professional wrestling will appear on this wrestling spectacular on the 27th of August, including wrestling's living legend Bruno Sammartino. Looking forward with great relish to locking up with 317-pound Nikolai Volkov. Likewise, chomping at the bit to once again re-enter the squared circle of Madison Square Garden is the North American heavyweight champion Pat Patterson, who once again clashes in the return match with Bob Backlund. With that in mind, let's bring on Pat Patterson now, along with his manager, the Grand Wizard of Wrestling.
Listen, I don't want to waste my time talking to you. Backlund, I hope you're listening. You know, ever since you've been champion, you've faced some of the toughest and the strongest wrestlers in the world today, and you've beat all of them. This is one twice, and you can't beat me, Backlund, and you know that you can't beat me. And the last time that I stepped in the ring with you, your manager saved the championship for you. Well, this is only the beginning. You put 14 stitches in my head, and nobody does that to me and gets away with it. Have I got a surprise for you, Backlund? I said I was going to win the North American Championship belt, and I did it. And I'm telling you to your face, I am going to take your belt away from you. This is the time. This is the moment. I am ready, and I'm telling you to your face, I'm taking that belt away from you. And I know you are scared. I know your manager is scared. I know Vince McMahon is afraid. I know all the promoters is afraid, because I'm going to take that belt away from you. And I promise you, Backlund, when I beat you, you'll never wrestle again, because I'm going to cripple you. I am sick and tired of being pushed around. I am the best, and I'll prove it to you.
Pierre Clermont was born January 19th, 1941, in Montreal, Quebec, Canada. He was most known for his incredible professional wrestling career, including being one half of one of the most influential tag teams of all time, the Blonde Bombers, as well as being one of the most influential, most important, and most spectacular creative minds in all of professional wrestling history, including being the person behind the creation of, honestly, one of WWE's marquee events each and every year, the Royal Rumble. But more importantly than that, he was also known as one of the most important creative minds in terms of how matches were constructed and how finishes were figured out for wrestling matches. And I mean, honestly, I could go on for probably 4 or 5 hours, territory by territory, what Pat was doing in Montreal, what he ended up doing in Boston, what he did in the West Coast of America in San Francisco. But in all honesty, there are probably a multitude of programs that cover that kind of topic, and really that's not what today's episode is about. And the funny thing about doing Grappling with Canada, and this is kind of something that is, as I've gone through season 1, and certainly as I've been noticing with season 2, is you can format a story, you can figure out what you want to talk about in terms of the individual that you're going to be covering, but sometimes the story of that person takes you in a completely different direction, and that is exactly what is going to be happening tonight, as we're going to really kind of divulge ourselves of the wrestling career, of the night in, night out, how many matches did he have, where did he have them, who did he have them with, all that kind of minutia. I don't think, as much as it's obviously important to the legacy of Pat Patterson, I think what's much more important for people to understand, for the legacy of Pat Patterson, for his fans across the world to really understand it, is who he was as a person. And the more I did the research for the Pat Patterson episode that I'm bringing to you guys today, yes, I had a ton of respect for what he brought to professional wrestling, as I'm sure anybody listening to this program has, obviously the highest order of respect for him. But as I went through the research, the Pat Patterson story to me became less and less about professional wrestling and more about Pat Patterson, the man himself. And what I came to realize at the end of it all is he was much more impressive as a person than just the man who created the Royal Rumble, the man who was responsible for some of the greatest finishes in professional wrestling history, the man who was part of some of the greatest matches and some of the biggest sellouts in professional wrestling history. That's all well and good, and it is a story that needs to be talked about. But I don't think that today that story is the one that we're going to share. Today we're going to be sharing much more, like I said, about Pat Patterson, the man. And again, this is something that a lot of quote-unquote, and I'm sorry that I'm going to go on a tangent here real quick before we kind of jump real deep into the program today, but this is also something that I've noticed in my research throughout the program, is how Pat Patterson has been reported on and portrayed in mostly wrestling media, but also some other types of media. And this is something that we're going to be discussing later on in this episode with my conversation that you're going to be hearing with Bertrand Hebert in a little bit. But I feel like I need to preface everything that we're going to be talking about, because as everybody knows, I like to frame things in a proper context as we kind of move forward in the program. So we're going to be diving into a lot of information as we normally do on this program. And I'm trying to tactfully say this, and if it comes off gruff, I apologize, but we're 12 episodes in. You guys have come to expect shooting from the hip from me at this point in time, so I'm going to come right out with it. There's so much lazy narrative out there about Pat Patterson because everybody cherry picks the easy things to talk about. They talk about the Royal Rumble. They talk about his matches with Ray Stevens. They talk about matches at Madison Square Gardens, and then they'll brush over the sex scandal in the WWF, and then they'll talk about his time as a stooge, and they will somehow think, and this is not just wrestling journalists, this is also quote-unquote historians, something that we talk about later on in the program, who seem to have this perversive, lazy narrative that kind of runs through the majority of the reporting that you hear from wrestling media. And unfortunately, it's something that as time progresses, and given the fact that Pat Patterson, we lost 1 year ago in December of 2020, it's still something that sticks around today, where people just seem to not want to go into the details of Pat Patterson, the man himself, and just cherry pick, like I said, the the lazy narrative. So rather than give you guys an IMDb, Pro Fight DB, he wrestled here, he did this and whatever, I really truly felt that it was important that we really take the time today to discuss Pat Patterson. And you'll note that I always refer to him as Pat Patterson and not Pierre Clermont. Now, this is something that quote-unquote smart historians will talk about Pierre as some sort of way to showcase their wrestling knowledge, I guess, is part of it. But what I've come to learn and understand about Pat is who he was born as is not who he became. He is, in every way, shape, or form, Pat Patterson. That's the way that we talk about him in this program. That's the way that I continue to talk about him. That's the way that he wanted to be talked about. So as we move forward on the program, you're not going to see a distinction between the two names. We are going to be referring to Pat Patterson the way that he wanted to be referred to in his story. And that's another thing that's very important that you're going to be hearing in my conversation with Bertrand Hebert is the importance of Pat Patterson finally talking about his story, because as impressive as his wrestling career was, like I said, him personally as a man is way more impressive, and I can honestly say that throughout my research, and especially with my conversation with Bertrand Hebert, I have much more respect for Pat Patterson, the man, as you're going to come to find out right away. But before we jump right into my conversation with Bertrand Hebert, I know I've kind of gone long-winded and I apologize, but as I always do, I wanted to frame things in a proper context before we move forward. So, before I bring on my special guest tonight, Bertrand Hebert, I'm going to play another classic promo from Pat Patterson, and then we're going to move into my conversation with Bertrand. Please enjoy.
Along with Pat Patterson, what is this Intercontinental Champion?
Just what it says, Mr. McMahon. Last week, Pat Patterson and yours truly were in Rio de Janeiro for the week, where Pat Patterson and 20 of the world's, not the United States, not Northern United States, not Southern United, but from all over the world, England, France, China, Russia, all over. That is where the tournament was held, and this is the man who emerged triumphant, the new Intercontinental Heavyweight Champion, Rio de Janeiro.
Oh, now, Mr. Patterson, what happens to the North American title if, in fact, you are the Intercontinental Champion?
Well, let me tell you something. First of all, the Intercontinental Champion represents a lot of money and a lot of prestige, and represents a lot more prestige than the World's Championship belt, because you know why? To win that championship, I had to beat 15 of the best wrestlers in the world in the tournament, and I came out on top. So I don't care who the world's champion is, I am the Intercontinental Champion, and I'm the best in the world today. Now, as far as the North American Championship belt is concerned, I really don't care what happens to it, because now I'm up to bigger things. They'll probably have a tournament or something. I really don't care. Now I'm up to bigger things. You're looking right now on your television screen at one of the best wrestlers in the world today, Pat Patterson, the new Intercontinental Champion. Now, how do you like that, to see me on your television screen?
We thank you for your time, the Grand Wizard and Pat Patterson.
Before we go, they tell me you have a lot of class. Why don't you shake my hand and congratulate me?
Congratulate us both.
Congratulations.
Well, thank you.
Thank you very
Pat
much.
Patterson and the Grand Wizard. We shall return with more wrestling action in just a moment.
All right, finally happy to be joined on the line, technical issues aside, by wrestling historian and author of a great deal, and co-author, actually, as well, of a great deal of wrestling books, but more importantly, the one that we're going to talk about today, the Pat Patterson biography. I'm very happy to join on the line by Bertrand Hebert. Bertrand, how are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you for the invitation.
Oh, it's absolutely my pleasure, and you know, we've been talking a bit back and forth in this last month in regards to our subject of this month's episode, naturally, Pat Patterson. But before we get into all that, if anybody who isn't familiar with yourself, and shame on you, by the way, because you should be, considering that Bertrand was on our Dino Bravo episode, but for everybody who's not familiar with yourself, just tell the listeners at home a little bit about yourself before we get into tonight's program.
So I've been involved in professional wrestling one way or another for a long time now, from Pro Wrestling Illustrated correspondent in the province of Quebec to being a promoter and a booker for Northern Championship Wrestling for almost 10 years. I worked for Jacques Rougeau, worked for Paul Leduc. I worked for the TOW project where I met Pat Patterson for the first time here, which was a television pilot series for RDS television. And from there, I also worked with Pat Laprade, which I fictionally called The Other Guy, on the Mad Dog Ninja Screwjob, which was our original book about the story of the Montreal wrestling territory. We also wrote the Mad Dog Vachon biography together. And more recently, and coming up right now, Andre the Giant, the Eighth Wonder of the World, the second printing, the paperback release is coming out at about the time you're listening to this. So ask your bookstores if you haven't read that book. It's the first time that we go into a second press and getting after the hardcover, getting the paperback. So that's kind of exciting that Andre is being remembered. And I also work with Pat Patterson by myself to put together his biography. I was the third man on deck after Pat got the other two out of the project. He couldn't get along with them. That's it. And it was a wonderful project working with Pat and, becoming friends with him. And we traveled the world promoting the book. So it was an amazing time.
So just real quick before we gloss over it, if you're hearing this program on December 1st, or if you're hearing it before December 24th, then you have lots of time to stuff your stockings, as it will, with that paperback edition of the Andre the Giant book. So I very much encourage any listeners who have not purchased that book to go ahead and stuff your stockings, if you will, with that one. But in regards to the Pat Patterson book, and this is something that gets overlooked as well, is how much time and effort and the familiarity with the person writing the book it takes to make this whole thing come together. You just briefly glossed over how he had an issue with two other people who were going to write about the book, and then you came on board. Talk to me a little bit about how the process came together in regards to you hooking up with Pat Patterson in regards to doing the book, and then how that whole kind of issue came to be resolved with yourself coming into the picture to write the biography.
I mean, for Pat, it was always about being comfortable with the story and what was put on paper, and also and building a trust between him and the writer, as he didn't want just about just to put a book. He wanted to have a book that really told his story, the full story for the first time. So that was important for him. So it was indeed a very long process. I mean, when I met Pat and we worked together on the TOW wrestling show for the RDS television station here, I ended up producing Pat in his old segment, which he used to do on French TV in the past, which was called The Brunch of Pat Patterson, which was kind of a Piper spit version. Back in the day, he was a heel. In our version, in 2013, he was a babyface, and we ended up, going over old Brunch and putting together a segment for the show. And through all of that, I had met Pat before on the production meeting for the TV, and I given him a copy of Mad Dog Ninja Screwjob. And Pat loved the book, loved the part about himself in the book, but felt it was very true, and liked how it came off, which was for my Dr. and Screwjob. A big part of our later success is that the story we told about everyone in the book, people who read it thought we presented a very fair statement and a very fair story, where we were very not protective of the business, but very respectful towards the business and towards everybody in it. And Pat really loved it. So I would say about a couple of months later, I mean, and we talked, he said, at the office, they want me to write a book. I am working with this writer. He's the second writer, and I don't, it doesn't work too good, and I have to explain everything to him. He doesn't know anything about wrestling and blah, blah. So I said, well, I'm available. A few months later, I mean, I just got a phone call out of the blue. He said, Hebert, I'm going to tell them I want you to write the book with me.
Wow.
Okay. and we went from there. But from that point, I mean, it was a very long process. So I flew in, and after that, I mean, it took quite a while for me to get the interview, the official interview, and to a point where Pat had told me they were going to call me, they were going to fix me to go to Connecticut and get interviewed at Titan Tower and all of that stuff. So I was like, well, okay. So at about the time where I given up, I got the call from Kevin Dunn's secretary, and they booked me to go in and out of New York with the drivers coming up and picking you at the airport and all of that. And I had an interview with Kevin Dunn. I think it went pretty well. I knew, and they told me that they were going to meet with a few more people during the week. And they knew that I was Pat's guy, but they were not too sure. I have only wrote Mad Dog Ninjas and Screwjob at that point. There was always that worry that it's going to be a wrestling book. And Pat didn't want a wrestling book either. So, but you cannot tell Pat Patterson's story without the wrestling component.
Yes.
So, I think I did well. But again, Titan's time is a way for them to stretch deadlines. I mean, they basically told me that within a week a decision would be made. It took 3 months.
Oh my God.
And Pat called me about 24 hours, and he told me, "You got the job. They're gonna call you." Be ready. And 24 hours later, I kind of had another phone interview with a producer that was going to be our contact person, and basically told me that I had the job from there, and we set up a meeting. He was going to flew in Montreal to meet with me and Pat, and got us set up with my publisher in Toronto, ECW Press, and so that became very easy for me because I already knew the team over there, and we put the deal together and got going. Along the way, met a few friends who told me, once the ball gets rolling, you don't have to sign anything. They're gonna play by their deal, and you just need to start working. So that's what we did. Me and Pat started to book interviews and work together. I mean, I had over 14 interview session, official for interviews session. I spent a week with him in Florida, also where we worked on what was done with the book at that point, and I, scanned pictures, went through souvenirs and things of that nature. We then worked, of course, in the getting the manuscript ready together. So I mean, it was never for him a project where he would just do 1 or 2 recording or spend a week with me and then do whatever he want. He wanted to be involved. He wanted to tell me more, and he wanted to go have a drink with me, go have dinner, and think over and feel comfortable with me. So I mean, I was a blessed man to be able to be sitting under the learning tree and talk about his life and ask questions. And some subjects, I might have been the only person ever to brought those subjects up with him on an interview, and be able to know him and learn about the guy who used to be Pierre Clermont, because contrary to what some people were thinking, he had his name changed. So it was very important to book his plane ticket under Pat Patterson.
So, my goodness, you brought up several very fascinating talking points in that, but one that, because I'm going to lose my train of thought here, and I want to just circle back to it quick, and then we're going to kind of backtrack our way to move forward in the story. But when you were dealing with the WWE, because this is something that, wrestling quote-unquote fans have heard for quite a while, is that they love to control the narrative. They love to have their hands in everything. When you were in the process of doing the biography with Pat Patterson, did they have a lot of say in what was said in the book, or did they kind of give you the hands-off approach and said, you know what, this is Pat's story, you guys go and put this thing together?
They were very hands-off. I mean, I believe we had 2 requests. They wanted more info on why Vince fired Shawn Michaels in one of Pat's stories, and why he was fired, and why Vince didn't want to bring him back. Because for them, it didn't make any sense that a legend such as Shawn Michaels was in a position where he was fired and Vince didn't want to bring him back. So they wanted a bit more details there. And Pat had a story also about midgets, and they wanted it to be slightly modified, and the word midget not being used. So,
which, that makes sense, because that could be viewed as a very divisive term, so I can understand that part of it.
But the book was reviewed by GLAAD, and was very popular, and it made the rainbow list in the United States for library. Inspirational stories about the gay and lesbian community, and so they were very happy with it along the way. And as long as the way, and I was very proud of that, is the way we wrote it, and I wrote it to make it as Pat was talking. They left it alone, basically. Even the more crunchy of subjects and the more difficult of subjects, they had no notes, no change that or all that. They asked a little bit more details about Shawn Michaels, and a little less about the midget story. So all in all, it was a very positive experience as far as that's concerned.
There's one word that you used when you were describing your view of the book, and that was fair. And this is something that has come to play in terms of the way that I've been going about this program, and the other authors that I've had on the program. Obviously, yourself and Pat have been on previously. Heath McCoy has been quite the contributor to this program, and even somebody like last month, I had Javier Oist on, who's a contributor with Pro Wrestling Stories. But it's getting these wrestling stories and these personalities, but presenting them in a very fair and balanced light, to put in a proper context. And honestly, like, reading the book, that's what I got out of it. It was very fair and very balanced. You always hear about, in the world of wacky, professional wrestling, that everybody's a showman. They're trying to put themselves over. It's all about them. I didn't find that in this book. And a credit to yourself, because I understand that it would be very easy to be, sucked in, we'll say, to the orbit of the individual who you are writing for or writing with. Whereas from everything that I read in the book, and like I said, it was very well done, it's very much, you can tell that it's Pat's thoughts and words. Obviously, you're transcribing it to the literature, but it's very balanced. It's very fair, and it's not a book of grandstanding, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, and it was very important for Pat. I mean, he said, I don't want to write a book to put myself over. I want to tell my story. So that was always something that came up as we worked on this, and there was some stuff or some way I presented early draft where he was saying, I don't like that. I don't need to say that. I don't want to put myself over. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do that. So it was very important all along for me to represent that, while still, you still need to say he was the first intercontinental champion and the role he played backstage. You still have to present facts on that level. And he was okay with it all along, and it would have been a disservice to downplay his importance also. But to find the voice and keep the voice was also very important, because Pat had a way of thinking and talking and fast, slow English to French, which was one of my big advantages. Pat would switch from French to English during interviews many times, but I could keep up.
Where I would be fumbling and bumbling and verklempt and everything else.
Often enough, when the story happened in English, he would tell it in English, and if the story had happened in French, he would tell it in French.
That's so cool.
So, it just came naturally, and for him to be able to switch between the two, depending on how he was feeling or what he was thinking about, made the process very easy for him. And the two best compliments we ever got from the book was Mick Foley, after reading it, saying that he could hear Pat speaking in his head while reading the book. And Stone Cold Steve Austin was, when he discussed the book with Pat on his podcast, was that, I was reading it and I saw you were getting ahead of yourself, backtracking, and it was just like speaking with you. So that was very good, because I was going for that feeling that you just met Pat Patterson at the bar and he's telling you his life story, and he's having a beer at the same time, and he's laughing, making a joke, and slapping you in the back. So I was very happy with the final product, and Pat as well. And it became for him a way to free himself of a lot of the baggage he had from hiding over the years.
So we're going to go back to the future a little bit here. So you were talking about how you were working with Pat on the program on RDS, but before that, did you have any interactions, or did you run into Pat Patterson, or did you see Pat Patterson on your television screen, if you will, when you were growing up and getting into wrestling as a kid?
Of course. I mean, I started watching wrestling in the early 80s in Montreal when international wrestling got going, and Pat early on was a big part of it. That's around the time he started working in New York. So Montreal and New York being so close, he ended up coming and working a full summer here and doing a lot of in and out spots in Montreal. So when he turned heel and became Le Rêve du Québec, he was one of the most hated person. I hated Pat Patterson. He was such a good heel. He was Pat Patterson, but he was a Quebecer. So obviously he had changed his name, and he would kept telling French people how dumb we were and how much we liked eat, hot dogs, and we had no class and things of that nature, and that he was the Rêve du Québec, the dream of Quebec, because he had made it in the United States and he was a big star and all that. So he was amazing. And when you go through that as a kid, you don't necessarily see how good he was. But, doing my research for the first book, there was a lot of time when the last match on the card was the tag match with Pat Patterson instead of the international championship match with Dino Bravo. And today I can see why, because, nobody wanted to follow Pat's match,
Well, exactly.
Was an amazing worker, and his stuff was hard to top, and it made all the sense in the world to me as a booker on why those tag team matches full of action with Pat Patterson being such a good heel and such an amazing worker were put on last, even though they were not billed necessarily as the main event or the big drawing match, because they were going to be the match that delivered and sent everybody home on a high. And I remember going home on a high, the Rougeau brother against Pat Patterson and Mad Doug Lefebvre. Those were amazing battle and very heated battle as well. So, I had very fond opinion of Pat Patterson. I remember also when WWF took over, and he had the brunch segment as a heel type, like a Roddy Piper type interviewer for the French market, and he was amazing in that as well. He was almost cartoonish in the presentation. However, I mean, you know, he would, you know, fake translate what the babyface would say in English, and vice versa. So it became a classic, you know, a nostalgia classic over the years. I mean, we all love to go and watch a whole brunch back with Pat, because he was an amazing interview as well as being an amazing worker. And today, it's even looking back today, I mean, knowing all he did backstage as well makes it even more fun. I mean, so obviously I had become over the years a big fan of Pat Patterson. I remember hating him. So, I mean, working with him, knowing all I knew, was just mind-blowing for the guy who started to watch wrestling at 10 years old. And also, you know, learning also and talking wrestling. It's pretty amazing when Pat Patterson is sitting at Gorilla and he's texting you, asking you what you're thinking of the show. So, I mean, that was a lot of fun.
That's incredible.
So was using my comments with anyone, but I mean, sometimes he liked to have another bell ring to see, you know, if what he was seeing is the same thing everyone was seeing, or how it came off on television at home rather than at the arena. So that was that was a cool relationship that we built, and you know, it became also, you know, he liked talking about the wrestling, but he loved getting, you know, how's your kids doing, how's your wife, and you know, he was very down to earth.
Before we move on, I have to circle back to this, because that's something I've never heard before, is, you know, Pat sitting in Gorilla and reaching out to other people, like outside of the WWE, to see what they're... I can't think of anybody else who would ever take the time to... Because you hear all the time, you know, the writers write this... I hate to use the word script, but that's kind of what the WWE does nowadays. You know, the writers write the script, and then they just kind of move on, and there's no tangible touchback, if you will, to like, okay, are there people who I appreciate their feedback? What do they think of the show? And I think that's so incredible that Pat would reach out to, obviously, to yourself and just, hey, what'd you think? Like, that's so cool. And that's something I would have never known before.
I mean, you know, and it was just, you know, it was chit chat, basically. And you know, when we were working on the book and we were having an interview session on a Tuesday, I mean, obviously he would say, did you watch the show? You know? And I would give him my feelings on it. And sometimes, you know, he had went to bed before the end of the show as well. So, you know, Pat was not totally blind, and he could accept that the business was different, but, you know, he had a lot of grieves on some of the issue and that we're still having, I believe, with
you are, yes.
But, you know, that's a battle, that's a hill he was not ready to die on anymore or fight too much anymore. So, you know, he just gave his input, and he was happy with that.
So naturally, at the start of the program, we had kind of discussed on how, you know, when you're writing the book with Pat, and how very fair and balanced it was. And there was a lot of information that I had found in the book that I didn't necessarily know previous. And obviously, we're not going to go chapter for chapter from their book, because, again, I highly encourage everybody to pick this up, because it's an incredible read. But there are a couple of highlights that I wanted to kind of cherry pick and then kind of get more in depth and how it was for yourself hearing these stories, and then how Pat felt about sharing them with you. So there was one in particular that had struck me, and it was regarding his childhood. And I mean, you can read on Wikipedia how he came from, a very humble beginning, right? His family was poor, essentially. And I'm not saying that in a derogatory way to say it, but that's the fact. And what was written on the book, and I'm going to paraphrase here quickly, just really accentuated that. And I wanted to get your thoughts on it as well. So he had said in the book that there was his whole entire family. They were in a 2-bedroom apartment. One of the bedrooms was for his parents, and the other one had the other 6 children sleeping in it. But there were some of them sleeping in hallways. They had to move themselves out of there to get out of the way of people waking up early. There was no running water. They had to go, clean themselves in essentially a community bath and all this. And for us in English Canada, we don't understand this kind of communal living. And then the other part of it is that I believe it was his aunt and uncle, correct me if I'm wrong, who owned the building. So it's like this. His family's there, his extended family is there, but they're all kind of living in like a poor surrounding. These are things that I didn't know about before, and reading the book, it was completely mind blowing.
Well, for Pat, I mean, it was always a goal. I mean, one of the things he was telling, when there's 9 people and the parents in the same house, I mean, you're never alone. You're never with yourself. You never have a minute except maybe going to the bathroom. So it became very important for him to see the world and see more than where he came from. So he wanted to see the world. He wanted to travel. He wanted to see different way of living, and he wanted a better life, obviously. But I don't think he was ever unhappy, and he was not alone in that situation in those days. My mother, grew up. She's about the same age as Pat, and she grew up in the La Vérendrye Park, where my grandfather was forest guard. He made sure there was no hunting when they're not supposed to and all of that. And they had no running water, and they had to bring water from the lake and have it on the stove to take a bath and things of that nature. So 80 some years ago, we didn't have the basics that we have today, and that was also a very important part of giving context to the story, that Pat came from a time way before the internet and way before phones flying everywhere, and it was a very different way of thinking and a different way of living.
There was one specific quote that he had in this, and I want to read it because I think it's pertinent to our later conversation in the Pat Patterson story. He had said, quote, "As a small child, I was already living in the closet." And that is taken in so many different contexts. A, he's living basically in a closet legitimately. B, the family life, and then C, obviously where he would wind up in his personal life. And it's comments like that throughout the book that I think that are very eye-opening, because you really see Pat Patterson, the man, emerge as we kind of go through the story.
I mean, he told a story towards the end of the book that he grew up in that very small apartment where they had his bed basically in a closet at night. During the day they would put the whole bed in the closet, and at night he would open the door and get the bed out, and he would sleep in there with one of his brother. And years later, I mean, he would have a suite, a 2-floor suite in an hotel all by himself and get lost. So, for him, it just became, he had difficulties even realizing how far he had come from that humble beginning, and he could not believe. I mean, if he would have told that to his younger self, I mean, his younger self would have laughed at him, that any of this was possible. So he was amazed, and when we started doing the book, I mean, he was already like 74, 75, and he said, I know my day will come one day, but I'm ready. I'm good to go. I've done everything. I've lived everything. I have a very happy life. So you can't live forever, and I can't complain. So it was very, and getting that weight off with the book as far as opening up completely about his sexuality, that had a big impact on him. It freed him in a lot of ways. I saw a different man once the book came out, and he felt comfortable talking about it with anyone. He went from calling Louis his friend in the book and making sure I was never write boyfriend, because he said, I never called him that. He was my friend Louis. So I can call him my boyfriend in the book. Okay, so, I rearranged things and worked on the wording and the phrases and all of that to make it work. And we're doing publicity in Montreal, and he's calling Louis his boyfriend on television. So I was mind blown that suddenly, after fighting with me on that word for the book, he was promoting it and talking about Louis as his boyfriend. So it made a huge difference in his life.
And that's something you really get the sense of and understand the further you go in the book is, and this is another subject that you had brought up earlier in our conversation I want to touch back on, is how he didn't want it to be a wrestling book. And I totally understand that, because, obviously the life of Pat Patterson, while he's, hugely influential in wrestling, and for a large part of it is that's his life was wrestling, but what he went through in terms of, coming out, which was not very well received, and we're going to touch on that in a second here, but then moving forward into a career that was also not very well received, we'll say, by his parents, and then moving forward in an industry where it was, and unfortunately today still is kind of frowned upon. As progressive as we think we are in 2021, it doesn't, there's still a lot of prejudice anyways, is what I'm trying to get at. And I'm not one to speak on it, because that's clearly not, the life that I live, and I'm not qualified to speak on it. But for myself, the openness and honest speaking that Pat Patterson did in the book, it was just, my goodness, it was eye-opening. And like I had prefaced this whole conversation with, even the way he came out to his parents was mind-blowing to me. But before we kind of get into that part of it, I had read a section in the book, and it was discussing how he kind of found wrestling. And this kind of, see, everything in this book kind of ties into itself, right? And that's what I love about it. So we've discussed how he kind of came up, and his family was very poor. Again, a very awful turn of phrase, but it's proper now, I guess, is the way to say it. But so he and correct me if I'm wrong, please, but he essentially gets free tickets to a wrestling show. He goes because they never get anything, and he's instantly hooked.
Yeah, and they bought a loaf of bread, and they had a free ticket prize inside to go to see the wrestling show. And he went, and he loved it instantly. I mean, he had wanted to be an acrobat, and he was hopeful to go with the high
Oh, that's right, too.
Show business. So finding that sport that is show business at the same time, it was very eye-opening for him, and he became a huge fan, and he just wanted to be a wrestler as well.
I'd like to take a real quick break to play some Pat Patterson audio, which I feel will add some context to the conversation that we're going to head into in this part of the program. Now, this audio is from the Pat Patterson documentary that the WWE had done, and it, in his own words, describes the next part of the program that we're going to discuss. So please enjoy this audio from Pat Patterson his conversation with the WWE, and on the other side, we'll get right back to my conversation with Bertrand Hebert.
At age 16, Pat's dream of a pro wrestling career was well known to his family, but they didn't know everything.
No one knew I was gay, you know. I was just a young guy, but I know I was not attracted by girls, no way. And the first time I did something with a guy, it felt good to be caressed, to be held and squeezed, you know what I mean? It felt good to me. But anyway, I was so excited, you know. I wake up my mom and dad at 1 o'clock in the morning, and I want to tell them the good news, that I'm in love. And my mother said, well, I'm happy for that. You didn't have to wake us up. I said, no. I said, I'm in love with a guy. My dad went crazy. He says, we're not going to have no career in this house. You're going to have to get out of here. And my mother said, well, you can't do that. My mother was crying. I said, no, don't worry about it. I'll leave. Don't worry. I'll leave. I left. I was 16 years old. And he told me, don't come and knock on the door. I didn't. I found a big suitcase in the garbage, tied it up with a rope, and I took a Greyhound bus. My sister gave me $20. I went to Boston.
So the one big misconception in the wrestling lore, if you will, and this goes back to something that you and I discussed off air on Twitter, but anyways, is how he left Montreal to get into wrestling. And I know we're kind of jumping along storylines, but there is kind of a recurring theme that runs throughout the course of this program, which I really want to, kind of accentuate and hit the nail on the head on. So he gets into wrestling in Montreal, like obviously finds it like you just elaborated. He starts training a little bit, but then, it was not looked upon well with his parents. And then he has his, I don't know what's the proper way you want to phrase it, but his first experience with coming out, we'll say. I guess that's a good way to phrase it. And he tells his parents, and he's essentially kicked out at that time. And that really is the genesis of how he moves from Montreal to Boston, because you'll often hear that, oh, Pat wanted to learn wrestling, he moved from Montreal to Boston, but they leave that part of it out. And I thought that you had done, and Pat, to his credit, had done such an eloquent job of explaining the truth of what happened. When you were going over that part of the story, how was that for Pat, and what did you make of it for yourself?
I mean, for him, it was very clear. I mean, that he wanted to be good at wrestling and make money with wrestling. And in Montreal, it was not a very secure job. It was a small territory. Often enough, only the promoters made the big money in Montreal, and especially if you were local, there was very limited positioning available. So, I mean, he learned his wrestling. He was very good. He had caught the eyes of a few promoters, and he had caught the eyes of Mad Dog Vachon already as a very talented worker. But the fact that he was gay, ended up putting him in a crossroad with his dad. And from there, he had already made some inquiries about getting some work in Boston, and that became the next step to move to Boston. And from there, the story took care of itself, and Pat became a huge star in the United States. And I believe, I mean, that's part of the reason or the reasoning sometimes with WWE not putting over the hometown boy in their own hometown, is that Pat became a big star in San Francisco, cannot be as far away from Montreal as that. And he was never a big star, he was never promoted as the top star in his hometown. And it was almost a foreign concept to him. And I think it still lingers into the WWE way of thinking about the local guy and how you can make him a big star if you use him right in his hometown. But for Pat, I mean, he said, yeah, well, you should be able to get over anywhere. And that's what he did. and for him, I mean, that's the story. He moved to the U.S. because he wanted to make a living, which there was much more opportunities for that in the U.S. And also because, of the way things turned out with his dad, and it took them years, not decades. I mean, they didn't make total peace until Pat was in New York again. So decades later. So
there's one funny story, and if wrestling fans will have heard the lore of Pat Patterson ribs throughout their entire life, but there was one part of the book that I read it and I laughed out loud because this just seems so Pat. Now, I just want to read this and then get your take on it, because I can't imagine how you felt writing this portion of it. So when Pat was in Boston, I believe it was, he had a certain landlord who he would prank all the time. And one of these pranks involved a bathtub full of water. So I want to read this quick and then just get what your thoughts on what you thought about it. So he says, quote, "Another time I let the water run in the bathtub all night in the second floor bathroom. The next morning, Ralph called out to me, 'Patterson.'" I can't even read it without laughing. "There's some serious shit going on around here." "What do you mean, Ralph?" I answered, as if I was still half asleep playing dumb. "Let me show you." He brought me over to his apartment. Water was dripping down the wall from the ceiling. It was goddamn Niagara Falls in there. Just to me, you always hear about the Pat Patterson to rib people and whatever, and it's funny to see that it starts like it's almost right from the start of his wrestling career. He's just getting into mischief.
Yeah, and Pat was not someone who took himself too seriously. You may have figured out if you read the book.
Yes.
You're a some-year-old man living on his own in Boston, and there's no internet or there's no video games or anything like that, so they're trying to entertain themselves. And in that particular building, most of the boys were living there. So it was kind of almost a wrestling dorm. So, I mean, that's what they did, anything to get a laugh out of each other. And the ribbing part of the wrestling community became from that, what are we going to do to entertain ourselves? Because the job is not necessarily the match itself. It's getting from matches to matches. It's the 2-plane and the 2-hour drive. And how are we going to get through that to get to do the match? The match is fun. It's the in-between that is the hard work. So, I mean, back in those days, that's how they survive. It's that who's going to make who laugh and who's going to pull the biggest joke and present the biggest tell-all story. So it all came from that.
Now, obviously, the biggest person who helped Pat throughout his journeys was, and he's quoted in the book many times as his friend Louis, who he had met in Boston, and then obviously, ended up traveling essentially the world with him. Kind of tell me a little bit about how you approached the start of the, well, we can say it, relationship with Louis in the book, and then how that kind of progressed into really telling Pat and Louis' story.
I mean, from the get-go, that was the most important part. And I pretty much knew anything that was known about Louis up to that point in time. So for Pat, it was very refreshing that he could speak to me about Louis being his partner and being his lover for 40 years and being in a relationship with him. And I would not confuse that with him being a tag team with Ray Stevens and wondering what he and Ray would do on the side. It was very comforting for him that I knew who were all those people in his life. And he didn't have to explain everything to me. I knew the background. He didn't have to explain to me who Ray Stevens was. He needed to tell me stories about Ray Stevens and how he felt about Ray Stevens. I knew who Ray Stevens was. I didn't need that explanation. So for him, that made a big difference, I believe, and compared to other writers that had tried to work with him, and it made him feel comfortable. So from the get-go, I mean, Louis was going to be a big character in the book for him, and the book is dedicated to him, and that telling their story was very important for Pat, because, they were hiding in plain sight for so long. It felt really good for him to be able to tell everything.
The Ray Stevens thing we'll touch on in a second, but for myself, and I found it so fascinating and so interesting, the progression of their relationship, because they're in Boston, and it's kind of like I don't want to say it's a love affair, but it's they fall head over heels for each other, like, very quick, and they're very serious. And then Pat leaves to pursue his career, and they were separated for quite a while, and then eventually Louis comes back in the picture, but it was always one of these things where Louis was just a friend, and Pat did, and we have to understand the times that Pat was living in, where it was, frowned upon to be, we'll say it, homosexual in anything. It doesn't matter if you're in wrestling or a regular 9-to-5 job or whatever. It was not accepted back then to be that kind of a person. So there were many stories in the book of Pat challenging people who would insinuate that he was in a relationship with Louis, and it would come to, oh, that's just my friend, he's just here. To me, there's so much of the book that speaks to the character of Pat Patterson, but there's a lot of the book that speaks to the character of Louis and how he was able to, stick with Pat through all of this essentially nonsense and build a life and build a relationship and keep pursuing it. It would be very easy for anybody to just, oh, I'm done, and on to the next one. But, man, I can't imagine what it was like for Louis in this whole crazy world of wrestling.
He was the rock. He was the anchor that kept Pat Patterson sane in that crazy world of pro wrestling. That's basically how he presented Louis to me. If Pat Patterson became too big in Pierre Clermont's head, to take the analogy, Louis would bring him back to earth. And they had a very balanced, a very yin and a yang relationship as far as that goes. And Pat told him along the way, I'm always going to come back home, but, wrestling comes first. So wrestling's going to bring food to the table. It's going to get us a good life, but, it needs to come up first. But I'll always go back home. So it's a very interesting relationship. Anybody that can stay together for 40 years,
hats off.
No matter what. So, I mean, they obviously had something very special. Pat never went out to look for the love after Louis died. He couldn't imagine finding anyone that would be the same, could fill out the same space between him and Louis. So it was just, my soulmate is gone and I'm going to do that part by myself type deal. He said he was open if something, if surprise happened and he would have fallen in love with someone, but he kind of didn't believe it was possible.
Well, and I don't blame him. I couldn't imagine, and I've only been married to my wife for, what are we in 2021? So it's been 7 years. I couldn't imagine 40 years and losing her and trying to move on from that. It was just, for me, it would be almost a non-starter. My goodness. And, for ourselves, we're like, and I'm speaking for myself and my wife, obviously we're in a, what's the word I want to use? We're in a more conventional relationship, if you will. I can't imagine what it would have been like for them. 40 years of legitimately no easy, like there was nothing easy about it.
No, I mean, obviously not. And even if it was accepted, I mean, for a long time, it was never to be discussed, to a point that when everybody knew and people started to accept that type of relationship, and it becomes easier for a gay, Pat never felt comfortable. There was never any coming out. Until Legends House, he had never publicly said to anyone, oh, well, by the way, I'm gay.
Oh, and I want to get on that a little bit later, but please continue.
It was very private always, and it was, you know, if you were close enough to him or were invited to the house with him and Louis, you kind of figured out, but it was never splattered in front of everyone, or it was never told, oh, by the way, we are, you know, it was, you know, it was very discreet all the time. And that's the weight that Pat had over the years. I mean, more recently, and that's something Pat either had forgotten or was not discussing, but there was an article recently that came out where, you know, when Pat early on in San Francisco and then Portland was there, the U.S. government was attempting to get him expelled from the country because he was gay, or they were suspected of being gay. So he was interviewed, interrogated, and they had people watching him and all that. And I remember him telling me that, you know, oh, they're watching me. And you're like, you know, come on, Pat, you know, who's watching you? And, you know, Pat's always half laughing, half being serious. And now it makes sense, but he never brought it up, and I didn't have any information to try to brought it up. So obviously it was very hard. You know, they had to keep it quiet. They didn't know who to trust, who they could tell. They needed to always have that plausible denial and to be able to say, no, it's just a friend, you know. So it was that bad at some point, you know, trying to get him out of the country so that he would get a psychological evaluation, and, you know, trying to get him out to Canada so that they would not let him back in. And so it was a hard time, you know. So for them to be together and to live that life, and more in the open, I mean, and it's very sad because, you know, a few more years, if they, you know, Louis would have reached a 2000 or so, you know, things could have been different for them, and they could have been a little bit more open about their relationship and be a very positive image for gay, and a very positive experience for people to share with them. I remember Pat having amazing experience in Europe when we went for the book with a couple that just got married. They actually, you know, shortened their honeymoon to go and meet Pat.
Wow.
and tell what they were inspired by it. So it is a reflection of the time, you know. Pat was 80 some years old, and when you grew up in that time frame in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, I mean, if it was known, it was not to be discussed, and if it was never to be revealed either. So it's a very different time.
And maybe that's why he has such a hard time, and clearly I can't speak for Pat, and I would never dream to, but maybe that was why it took till the Legends House, and again, we're going to get into that in a minute, for him to come out publicly with it, because it's almost impossible to live your life for, Jesus, what would have been almost 50 years of, you know, deny, deflect, and then to finally come out with it. It's not flipping a light switch, right?
Exactly.
It's the strength of character that it took for him to do it then is incredible in of itself. And again, we're going to talk about that in just a second, but I just want to further expand on the whole relationship aspect with Louis, because throughout the book, and I know I keep referencing it, and again, this is something that I truly would implore anybody listening to this program, if you haven't picked up the book already, pick it up. But like, there's stories where, you know, him and Louis are in an apartment, and somebody comes and, you know, Pat answers the door, or Louis answers it, I don't remember who it was, in their underwear, and then all of a sudden it's a big, oh no, he's just staying here, this is not what it looks like. And then at the matches that night, Pat has to go and almost, you know, fight somebody for insinuating that he's in a gay relationship. And this is when, at this point in time, Pat is already an established star and he's a moneymaker, but he still has to put on this facade, and he has to act like this is just his traveling friend.
Yes. So it's a very different times, and you know that does weigh on the psyche of anyone, and that's why it took so long. And he was telling me, well, everybody knew, but I never said anything. Yeah. They knew, but I didn't say anything. So for him, it was not the revelation, more of like being able to say it in public.
There is one story that I have to have you describe, because it's funny, but it's very interesting and very telling of the people involved, and that is the Mad Dog Vachon story. When Pat had gone out to Portland, in regards to finding out about Louis, if you will.
You know, once again, we're in the it's never to be discussed. So for Pat to have Louis over kind of put some light on their relationship. So that was the issue, and you know. To their credit, I mean, Louis was scared, but to Mad Dog's credit, I mean, once he started to talk to Louis and learn about him, you know, Pat said that they became better friends than him and Mad Dog. Because of the world, he had many different interests, and he could discuss about anything. So he would easily find a subject or something to share with. And Mad Dog was love the news and how things are going in the world, and you know, they would discuss and talk about the world and how things are, and what should happen for this, should happen for that, so they could redo the world over an evening. So you know, it is to the credit of Louis. You know, sometimes people knew as they were coming into a territory, but they always came in with the most amazing reputation. Everyone would put them over to a point where, you know, when Pat went to the AWA, Greg Gagne and Dick Bockwinkel had put Louis over so much that Vern was not too sure, being an older gentleman, about all of that. He wanted to meet Louis, and he wanted to have those the Louis meal.
Yes.
Louis entertained the big groups and was an amazing cook. So, you know, and we had that revelation as we spent the week together in Florida, how much that, you know, Pat was never a militant for the gay movement or was never publicly or openly gay. However, I mean, the way both he and Louis acted at work, interacting with other people, they changed a lot of opinion about what being gay meant. You know, their reputation was stellar. They were perfect gentlemen. They were amazing hosts. They were intelligent. They were brilliant. They were always present at work, always good worker, always doing their best. And you know, it changed a lot of people's perception about what it meant to be gay. So, you know, they were never in the street to try to get more rights or anything like that, but they did change a lot of people along the way. So that's also a great service they did as they move along in the world.
And naturally, with Louis passing in the tragic way that he did on essentially the eve of one of the most controversial or infamous pay-per-views in wrestling history, and I can't imagine what it was like for Pat to lose his, best friend, his love, his just everything, and have to continue in the wrestling world without the vast majority of people understanding his loss. That's a heavy weight to put on your shoulders.
I mean, it was the day of the pay-per-view, and to WWE's credit, I mean, they took really good care of him, whisked him away from the building and put him on the first plane to Pittsburgh so he could join Louis' family where he passed. And they were very supportive. I mean, obviously, wrestling business being what it was, they kind of told him, they took all the time off he needed, but obviously, maybe it'd be easier to get lost in work, which he did. And it worked in a lot of sense. However, it was kind of like a stopgate, Once he was out and going back to the hotel room, I mean, he caught himself quite a few times sitting on the bed and, starting to make a phone call and realizing that, there was nobody to call anymore. So that was a really hard time. But, times do heal the whole wound. But obviously, I mean, losing Louis was a big turning point in his life, and I believe, I mean, kind of coincide with the time when he started to have a less and less full-time schedule, and also, took time to travel and enjoy the world, enjoy his hard-earned money, and take care of himself a little bit through the years.
Just want to hit the pause button real quick to play some more Pat Patterson audio. Now, this is going to dig a little deeper into the conversation that we're going to have regarding Pat Patterson's time with the WWE Legends House. So, once again, I'm going to play some Pat Patterson audio, and then once again, we're going to jump right back into my tremendous conversation with Bertrand Hebert.
Pat. Is it me? Yeah. Oh. Well, from where I come from, when I had nothing, no family, no money, and I ended up with Vince working in the office. To me, that was the biggest achievement of my life. But there's more to that, guys. There's more to that. Sitting here tonight, I'm going to say something that I would never want to say publicly. But being here with you guys, for once in my life, I'm going to be me now. I survived all this being gay.
But when he just let it go tonight and made it happen, I started tearing up. My fellow Legends mates started tearing up.
I lived with that for 50 some years. Yeah. I had a friend with me for 40 years, and I lost him because he had a heart attack, and I ended up alone. I survived the business. I did. I'm so proud of me. It's tough, guys. It was tough.
We love you, Pat. We've always loved you.
I gave my life to the business. I don't regret nothing. And for the rest of my life, I want to be happy.
Now, something else that we had touched on a couple of times now is the Legends House escapade, if you will. This was not something that he necessarily wanted to do. Is that correct?
I mean, from his own word, is that Vince and Kevin Dunn twisted his arm to do it, and kind of hinting that it'd be a good place or a cool place for him to finally let go of all of that, and it was something he thought about when they started the process and started the Legends House. But, he was never too sure that he was going to go all the way. But those reality shows kind of have you're living 24/7 with people, so it's kind of a very charged up emotion. Quickly, you get tight quickly with the people you're living with. So, it felt good to just let go towards the end. And it was the start of the healing process that would be completed with the book. So, no matter if he was twisted to do it or not, that they did twist his arm to do it.
I thought it was funny. There's a few stories that he had said in the book about they were out doing an activity and, oh, you guys got to do it again. And he's like, oh.
I mean, that story is amazing. When they go fishing.
Yes, that's the one.
At all. And, the getting off the boat, the production crew cannot get the good shot. There's always something. They're too fast, they're too quick, a cameraman fell down. They're always screwing it up, and they have to redo it again. And Pat told them, I'll bet you $10 that, we're going to have to do it again. And they said, no, it's going to be the last take. And they screwed it up. And Pat said, I'm not doing any other take until I get my $10.
Oh, I love it.
That was Pat, because he knew production, and he knew, and, it was bad enough that they fishing, which, I think one or two people in the whole group love to do. But, there was no fish. They had one fish all day, the whole group. And and now we have to walk up that port for I don't know how many times. So, that's the joy of reality television.
Yeah, reality, quote unquote, I think is the proper way to put that one into context.
I was doing the finger thing, but we're not on video.
Yeah, no, there is no video on this program. That's tremendous. We're going to take a quick break from my conversation with Bertrand Hebert just to play some wrestling audio that will clear up a little bit of our conversation that we're going to have in this next section. Now, many fans of this show are not particularly wrestling fans, so may not understand the context of what we are going to be discussing, which is the heavy subject of the WWF sex scandal. Now, this news program from CBS in 1992 will kind of lay out what was happening with the WWF at that time. Unfortunately, this is something that Pat was kind of rolled up in, although, as you'll hear from in our conversation with Bertrand Hebert, there was no fire to the smoke that was put out there, if you will. So, once again, I'm going to play a little bit of this audio. It's going to give a little bit of clarification for those who are unfamiliar with what happened with the WWF sex scandals and the steroid scandals in the early 1990s. And on the other side, right back to my continuing conversation with Bertrand Hebert.
The baseball season doesn't open until next week. College basketball's Final Four is not till tomorrow, and the hockey players are on strike. So there's time to catch up on professional wrestling. That always strange world of hoaxers and hoaxsters has been hit now with some real scandals. Bob Paul reports tonight's Eye on America.
This is to sport what Jim and Tammy Baker are to religion, what Ripper is to wine. Very distant relatives. The winner, determined by the promoter beforehand, never lays a hand on the bum, only the spit is real. And yet this hideous combination of sideshow, acrobatics, and good guy versus evil has been boffo box office. Now, though, the business has been rocked by unprecedented charges of sleaze, even sexual depravity, from ex-wrestlers appearing on late-night radio shows.
It is definitely sexual harassment any way you slice it.
To the holiest of holies, national daytime television.
Now come forward a number of people to say, because I wouldn't have sex with another guy in the game, I couldn't get promoted.
I wouldn't sleep with the vice president of operations, so they fired me.
You saw ring boys, did you, being sexually harassed?
Yes, I've seen ring boys being sexually harassed.
Weird, you say? You want weird? Take what happened to midget wrestler, the Karate Kid. Propositioned, he says, by a prominent wrestling executive, then blackballed because he said no.
The main reason, though, you didn't work was because you wouldn't go to bed with him.
I believe that's the main reason.
No criminal indictments have been brought, no lawsuits filed, but the charges are no small potatoes because the cash cow of professional wrestling claims to sell more merchandise than even the National Football League. That's not all that's at stake. Even the game's biggest name has been tarnished.
I'm glad you've been listening to Hulk Hogan for the last 5 years, yelling and screaming about training, saying your prayers, and eating your vitamins.
But what Hulk Hogan preaches is apparently not what he practices.
He took steroids like he drank water.
One-time wrestler Dave Schultz used to be the Hulkster's best friend.
Did you personally observe Hogan at any point taking steroids?
Sure. I injected Hogan with steroids many times.
Many times?
Many, many times.
A dozen
Hundreds
times?
of times.
Hundreds?
Hundreds.
Hulkamania is the largest arms in the world.
Hulk Hogan would not talk with CBS News, but the man who has made millions marketing Hogan has gone on the offensive.
Some of these allegations are absolutely absurd that have been raised.
McMahon insists it's all just a conspiracy to wreck his business.
And it just seems as though they're all ganging up on us all at one time.
These are people with axes to grind?
Yes.
They would like to see you fail.
No question.
There's no sign the charges have done any harm. Although Hogan's star may be waning, one major manufacturer just ordered more wrestling toys. WrestleMania will be sold out. And even critics concede promoters are rich enough and fan mania is deep enough to ride out the storm.
This is not going to wreck professional wrestling.
Oh, no. 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 Professional wrestling, no. Professional wrestling will be around forever.
From midgets who feel discarded to might-have-beens who've fallen on leaner times, there is a crescendo of opinion. Congress ought to investigate. Yes, Congress, where checks have been hitting the canvas harder than Andre the Giant. No, wrestling or whatever this is has survived scandals before, and there is no reason to believe this one, too, won't be drowned out by all those fans who couldn't care less. This is Bob Paul in St. Joseph's, Missouri, for Eye on America.
That's part of our world tonight. Dan Rather for the CBS Evening News. Don't forget 60 Minutes on Sunday. I'll see you.
You know, obviously there's a lot of a ton of high points in Pat's career and his life, and obviously the highest of highs is his relationship with Louis. And again, this is something that goes into his own words and a lot better detail in the book. And once again, I would highly encourage anybody who hasn't read it to read it. But there is one, and this is something that I was debating on talking about in the program, and it's for a variety of reasons. Some good, some not so good. And this is regarding the as it came to be known, the WWF sex scandal. And I was going back and forth, and I really was on the fence of, do I want to give this issue a lot of credence? Because, and this is hard to talk about because it was a witch hunt. I think you and I can both agree on that part of it. But it's also something where, and this is something that I had talked about with yourself as well. I had just listened to a quote-unquote wrestling historian the other month who had gone through, the Donahue show, who completely misrepresented the entire issue to paint it as an issue to lump Pat Patterson into. So, as much as, and I'm sorry, I'm getting a little bit hoarse, and I have good friends of mine. They're a gay couple. I went to their wedding. I have my wife's cousin who's gay. I went to their wedding as well. I have the utmost respect, just as anybody else who, if they were straight, who got married. To me, it's such a sacred thing to get to profess your love and get married to somebody, and that's the relationship, whether it's gay, straight, lesbian, whatever, like, it's sacred to me, and it means a lot. And for me to see that Pat is still in 2021 getting lumped into this scandal from the 90s is ridiculous, and it's so counterintuitive to what wrestling is supposed to be. And there was a quote from the book that I just wanted to read, and then I want to get your thoughts on this whole issue, if you will, in regards to this scandal. And I understand that I'm kind of fumbling and I'm flummoxed and whatever, but I can't understand how this is still a thing in 2021, but it is, and this is something I wanted to touch on just very quickly, and then naturally we can move on to better topics. So his quote: "There was absolutely no laughter associated with the sexual harassment scandal. In the wake of other individuals' misconduct within the company, I was wrongfully accused of being involved in their inappropriate conduct. The fact that I was gay certainly played a part in me being targeted like that. Out of loyalty, I decided to make my life easy on Vince. I quit the company. In my mind, that was it. I was done." And this is something where there's a few factors I feel that come into play in this one. Is one, obviously the fact that Pat was gay, and whether or not he came out with it, everybody knew, right? Two was the ribbing nature that we had alluded to earlier. Pat was a notorious ribber, not in just strictly gay context, but there was, like I said, the one where he turned on his bathtub, plugged the thing, and let it overflow into his landlord's suite, right? Pat did all these ribbing things, but people tend to lump these issues into the same context. And then the third is that he is French Canadian, and there is a bit of a language barrier that people, I feel, took advantage of in the course of Pat's career. So you kind of lump all these things together, and then the WWF sex scandal happens, and automatically Pat is just thrown in there, thrown to the wolves, and God damn it, people still effing talk about this to this day. When you had brought this, or when you had come to this part of the story, and I'm sorry I'm going long-winded here, and I apologize to everybody listening at home, but when you had gotten to this part of the story, how did you approach it, and what was Pat willing to discuss, and what was his thoughts about it?
I mean, this was, obviously, I mean, there's a lot to digest here.
Yes.
So let's start with the beginning. This is the type of story, especially back then in the 90s. I mean, the original headline is huge, big first page.
Yes.
But there's the retraction and, the fact that he's not charged with anything, or that there's no long-term repercussion because he's cleared of any wrongdoing. That's page 6 in a very small, tiny corner of the page.
Buried.
Buried, and so everybody remember the headline. Everybody can find back the headline. Everybody can find the Donahue show. Nobody can find the guys the guy who put Pat Patterson on under the bus for no good reason other than to a company. Nobody can go and find his autobiography where it says that he lied on Donahue and he should never have done that. So Donahue can be found on YouTube. The guy's biography, you actually have to go and pick up his biography and see that he actually says in the book that he lied on that show. So that's the fight that Pat was in, and it was at the top of the list. I wanted to talk about that because I felt that how can he not talk about that on a book about his life? Because if he doesn't, that's like telling everyone that he was guilty if he ignored the subject, which was his first reaction and had been his motto since he went back to the company, was to ignore it, never talk about it, because people will say whatever they want. Doesn't matter what I say. So it was a little bit hard, and it took a lot of time before I found the courage or felt comfortable enough to bring it up. And we were able to talk about it once. And it was a very difficult conversation for him. And, I had to really convey that, that was his chance. That's what he would leave behind about the whole subject, because if he did not, that's like telling everyone that you were guilty. So that's the only time he cried when we had the interviews, because for him, it was almost like his wrestling dream dying at that point, because he was sure that he was never going to be brought back.
Yes.
And he decided to quit out of loyalty to the company and to Vince, and because he had swear to Vince Sr. on his deathbed that he would take care of his son for him. So he felt that was the only way to do it. Okay? But Vince was very loyal to Pat as well, and they did hire the company an outside company to run an investigation within the company and talk to everyone. And they cleared Pat of any wrongdoing. No one ever brought any charges to court. And the other person who had brought allegation on Donahue was also proven later to have lied about saying that he had been fired because he had refused a sexual advance by Pat, which was completely untrue. So we went through that, and I believe what's in the book is how he felt. And WWE, that's the only other thing they mentioned in the notes, was that if Pat felt that was his story, they were comfortable with it, as he would not name anyone else, and it was the truth. So I was very happy with how it come off, and almost a year, and by the time people are going to be listening, it's going to be a year since Pat's passing. I'm more proud that it's actually in the book. That's Pat's words. And when Pat passed away, I spoke with the New York Times for his obituary.
Yes.
And that's one of the first few things that they mentioned as they were asking questions, and I was able to get them a copy of the book, and I explained the whole story a little bit like I did there, and so by the end, when it came out, there's no mention of the scandal in the obituary. So for me, it was a little bit of indication that what I told Pat was that, if you don't say anything, they're going to lump it as guilty. And I believe that with time, the truth's going to be coming up on top, as they say in wrestling. And we're going to get far away from that story. And I'm not, Pat was an 80-year-old man. So, he had a crunchy humor, and often enough, because it was so difficult being gay, he was very jokey about it, and he wouldn't mind, especially in the later years when kind of everybody knew, he would kind of put a joke on the table right off the bat so that, nobody had anything on him as he was controlling the narrative. So, it probably a lot of those jokes would not go through today. But everything back in perspective from being an 80-year-old man or being in the 90s or being in the 80s, things were different. But, Pat was amazing. And in the end, he never did anything wrong in the sense of sexual harassment or using his position to prevent people from working or anything like that. I grew up in the province of Quebec, and if you knew how many people I spoke to working in the wrestling business in Quebec who told stories on how they were prevented of working from WWE because they were not working on the same team as Pat Patterson. And obviously, it kind of, you don't know Pat Patterson, and those guys, they did the dark match there, or they they work a house show loop there or things like that. And you're like, well, I don't know. It's like the third or fourth or fifth guy that tells that story that, they didn't make it because they were not gay. So you kind of wonder, But then I met Pat Patterson, and I spoke with him, and those stories are obviously, he was the biggest crutch for people who didn't make it in wrestling for a long, long time. It was an easy way for people to explain why they never became star or never were signed by WWE. They always blame the gay guy.
Okay, it's lazy and it's easy. That's what it is.
Yeah. And, it makes for a good story at the bar with other boys. But, that's not the truth. And also, that's how things were. We go back to how hard it was being gay, So, it was that hard, that people would blame you for not getting married. So it's, it's kind of very, very sad, because and I'm so happy that the book and the work we did and the interviews he did for promoting the book and Legends House, it didn't fully turn around the tide completely, but I think, the tide is going in the right direction. And slowly but surely we're getting away from that story. And an interview like today are ultimately, will turn the tide completely, and the truth will be discussed accordingly in the future.
There's a phrase you said in that statement, not statement, but our discussion there was how you were talking about, Pat, this is your time to say it, because if you say nothing, they're going to take it as you're guilty, and that's absolutely true. And the way that it's written in the book, I can hear him in my head, him being Pat Patterson, saying it, and you can hear the anger and the frustration, and you can feel it, right? It's one of these phrases, chapters, whatever. It's not a full chapter naturally. I don't want to play it off like that, but it's one of these statements that literally jumps off the page, and you can feel it, and it's palpable. And that is something, and I appreciate your comment. That's something that I hope that listeners of this program, when you go out into the, wide world web, if you will, and you come across incorrect context and incorrect statements, that you'll go out of your way to bring up what actually had happened, because it's going to take programs like us, it's going to take authors like yourself, books like the one that you had written with Pat, to really finally, put this thing to bed. And the other thing it's going to take is for people to stop using this lazy, ignorant narrative of, like you just said, Pat was gay and he held me back because I wouldn't blank. It's garbage. We all know it's garbage, and it's lazy. And the sooner that, whether it's wrestlers or quote-unquote historians or others associated with wrestling or wrestling fans or people who will listen to this program who enjoy, human interest stories, the sooner that we can all move to this, common goal of really getting to the root cause of talking about an issue, of exposing the truth and moving forward with that truth, I think is going to benefit everybody.
Obviously, and I'm really proud of that, because it did change the narrative. Pat, not that he would not believe, but didn't think that it would make a difference. And I believe it did. It did with the New York Times obituary. So I feel, that, we're going to be able to enlighten, one people at a time reading the book and listening to podcasts and interviews like this, to go beyond those claims and those original headlines.
So as we kind of move out of the, and I'm sorry everybody at home that was kind of a heavy subject, but it's something that really truly needed to be discussed, and Bertrand, I very much thank you for your comments on it. As we look to wrap up this portion of the program, because again, I'm in Winnipeg, we're predominantly English speaking out here. In North America, the predominant fan base is English, so we only see Pat Patterson as, you know, his work in Portland where he was a superstar, or, you know, a lot of us are very familiar with what he did in the WWF and then when he was with the Stooges thing. But for yourself, because obviously you have both sides of the coin. You have the English perspective, which you're kind of inundated with because that's what's put out there and portrayed, but you also have the French Canadian and Quebecois perspective. For yourself, what do you think Pat Patterson's legacy is specifically in Quebec, and then more so just in Montreal, about his life and his legacy in just Pat Patterson himself?
I mean, because he was never the big star of the territory, there's limited knowledge of what he is or what he was outside of the WWE fan base in Montreal. And you know, that did change a little bit with the book, and when he passed away, you know, he got some coverage locally, but not to the level that he was in the industry. You know, he was one of the last giants of the industry, one of the last great minds, if you will. And locally, I mean, that's kind of, it's hard. It's like trying to explain to someone why a director or is a big star in China or something. Locally, you know, because locally he never reached that level. So on the WWE stage, with the creation of the Royal Rumble and the boot camp match with Sergeant Slaughter and being the first Intercontinental Champion, you know, he's on the level like no others. And when you go behind the scene, you know, well, he was Vince right-hand man, and the WWE of today exists basically because of Pat Patterson in a lot of ways. You know, he does deserve a lot of the credit in helping and shaping the WWE and the product and the stars. And but locally, I mean, there's a fond memories of his time on television from the people who knew it, and he's very well known by the WWE audience because of how important Pat is to the lore of the WWE. But obviously, he's not the legend of a Johnny Rougeau or even Dino Bravo locally were the big star of the territories, or even Mad Dog Vachon. And because, you know, for one thing, Pat changed his name for an English name.
Yeah.
And a huge star outside of the Montreal wrestling territory.
And I guess for yourself, when you were doing the writing for the book, what was the story that kind of stuck out to you the most, or what story did you maybe not know before that you got more information of, or what really stood out to you in terms of writing the book? Was there one tale or one story that kind of stuck out to you of like, this is tremendous?
Well, I love the fact that Pat was attempting to be a showman way before he even fell in love with wrestling.
Yes.
I love the fact that, you know, he was in love with someone and it lasted 40 years and they travel and move together and you know, it was a very beautiful story, and he did call him his friend. It was a story of friendship and love. You know, there was a lot of friendship between the two men beyond love. So I think that's also a very important part of any relationship. You have to be friends. And you know, I think the biggest lesson I got as a wrestling fanatic myself is that there's more to life than wrestling. And you know, you know, sometimes Pat would get tired. Let's talk about something else. I don't want to talk about wrestling. You always want to talk about wrestling. We can talk wrestling tomorrow. You know, so it was like the news or whatever happened. You know, during the pandemic, I mean, he would call me on a regular basis just to talk and see. And he had idea when this is going to be over. We're going to be renting a big theater in Montreal, and I'm going to do a singing show. I'm going to invite friends to come and sing, and we're going to do it for charity. And he had always the plan about how do we get back on stage. And we did the shows in England, in the UK, when we did the promotion for the book.
That's right.
And it was amazing. He loved it, being on stage, telling stories, and would finish the night singing My Way. I mean, he wanted to redo something like that, but in Montreal. You know, he always had plans and ideas. I don't think his health would have allowed it, but, you know, it made him so happy to talk about it, about, you know, creating a show. So that creating a show, being part of the show, that started very young. It went through all of his career, and at the end, that's all he could think about was to get back, find a way to get back on stage in front of people.
And that, to me, just that kind of encapsulates Pat Patterson as a man and what he kind of brought to the table. Just he legitimately was the ultimate showman, whether it was in front of the camera or behind.
Oh, sure. I mean, he wanted that. He lived for that. I remember in Scotland, first show, he was on such a high because, you know, oh, Pat, we're going to be doing, you know, a show on stage and we're going to sign autographs and blah, blah, sorry, how many people is there going to be, you know? In his head, he was going to draw 20 people. So, you know,
wow.
5, but it, you know, it's a pack house. It's a few hundred. And
yeah.
They're very, very vocal, and you know, it's a success. And he's getting a big pop at the end and the big standing ovation. He loved it, you know. So we went for beers and food afterwards. He was on a high, you know. Are we doing one tomorrow? So, you know, and that might have been the best night of the tour. So, you know, after that, you know, he didn't like all the other dates as much. However, the last night was very good as well. But it is what it is, you know. He loved that, and he kept talking about that trip all the time and how it was fun, and he wanted to recapture the first night. So that was Pat, you know. He just loved talking and getting a pop and getting a reaction and getting the love from the people.
Now, is there anything that we haven't covered in this episode that you would like to get into before we wrap up tonight?
We talked about so much. I was very fortunate. That's how I see it, to be able to tell his story and to call him a friend, and to be able today to still tell the story, tell the truth, because he deserved it. He was an amazing person, amazing mind, amazing job in the wrestling industry. And the positive needed to be highlighted, and someone needed to be able to tell his story. So, you know, he was my friend.
Well, Bertrand, I have to thank you because, man, this has been just a tremendous conversation and something that I hope will continue well into the new year of 2022. Speaking of which, looking forward into the future of 2022, what do you have on the back burner, if you will?
Well, I mean, first, you know, if you don't have the book, it's called Accepted, How the First Gay Superstar Changed WWE, from ECW Press. So please go get yourself a copy, get yourself an electronic copy if you cannot find a book copy. I'm very proud of that book. I'm working right now in French for a French book with Marc Blondin, who used to be a French announcer here for WWE, WCW, and TNA in the province of Quebec and in Europe. So it's a very small project. It's a fun project, learning to work with Mark and learn about his career. So that's going to be a small fun project in 2022. It's probably never going to be translated, but that's what I'm doing right now. And after that, each project had the magic of leading us to another. So Pat Patterson is working on a hockey book right now. I'm working on that small book on wrestling on the side. The Andre the Giant book, as I mentioned, is going on a second printing in a different format on trade paperback. So we're really proud and happy about that. So once again, I mean, if you were hesitant to get the hardcover because of the price tag, this one is much more affordable. And the content is the same. It had got amazing review, very humbling review. So that be my. It's also an audio book for people who don't like to read. So I mean, really go for it. We're really proud of that. Bringing Andre's stories to life. Putting fiction and the stories and the truth once again in a very different light. In the life of Andre, I think it was very important that work be done. So except for that, I mean, I'm not doing much else. It's a lot of work to begin with, but hopefully, there'll be more projects. And those remain passion projects. They nothing we do with those books. I like the saying. They're no Harry Potter's book as far as sales go. They do okay. The Andre the Giant did really well, but it's not sufficient to do just that and be able to turn out multiple projects. But obviously, they all work of love, and we wish all wrestling fans will give it a shot and try and discover the magnificent stories of all those incredible characters.
And naturally, we look forward to a return of yourself on this program in 2022. Hopefully we have something on the docket that will pique your interest, and we can have you back as well again to have another discussion.
Of course, more than happy to talk wrestling.
Well, Bertrand, you've been honestly so good to me, and I wish yourself and your family all the best in the new year. And I cannot wait to see what happens in the next year and the next coming years as well for you as well.
Perfect. Thank you. Hey, maybe something to close up. My son started wrestling.
Oh, okay. Tell us about that quick.
And when he was training, we talk about that with Pat a lot. And my son had the idea to do a little bit of an homage for him because, Hebert is not really a good name. So English. So he decided as an homage to Pat to call himself Zach Patterson.
Wow.
He's been doing really well on the indie scene here in Quebec, and he had been training for 2 years. He's been hitting the gym for 5 or 6 years, and he's doing very well. And he's, I believe, making Pat very proud. As Pat had peeked in along the way, and said, yeah, he can do whatever he wants. He's a good-looking kid. So hopefully, he'll be able to leave something and get the Patterson name out there one more time.
That's tremendous.
So I feel very proud about the work he's put in to go where he is, and it's kind of, for me, very special that he has the Patterson name for now as his calling card. Pat's brothers have come and see him wrestle, and they want us to send them the matches, and they're very proud that someone is keeping the Patterson name out there.
Well, Zach, we look forward to big things from you as well in the future. That's fantastic. I had no idea.
So that's a little story to feel good story to finish the show.
Awesome. I love it. Bertrand, thank you again so much for your time tonight.
Thank you, and have a great day and a great holidays. And, thank you, Pat.
Before we finish up for this evening and for the season finale of Grappling with Canada, I have a few things that I want to discuss. First off, I have to give a plethora of thanks to many fine individuals who were guests throughout the 12 episodes of this season of Grappling with Canada. So thank you very much, Ashley Rose Nova, Hotshot Danny Duggan, Heath McCoy, Pat LaPrade, Alicia Bikaki, Steve Verrier, AC from Maple Leaf Wrestling, Greg Oliver, Mr. Billy Two Rivers, Nathan Hatton, Bo James, Dr. Mike Lano, Ead, Cowboy Dan Crawford, Trent Zberry, Javier Oist, and obviously my guest for this evening, Bertrand Hebert. Thank you, everybody, for making this program as successful as it was, and thank you all very much for allowing me to pick your brains, and some of you on multiple shows, and some of you through multiple emails as we kind of progressed throughout this first season of Grappling with Canada. So once again, thank each and every one of you for being a part of the program, and I look forward to seeing a few new working relationships in the year 2022. Also, for Season 2, if you are listening to this program on one of the various podcasting feeds, keep it locked right here. In about 2 weeks, I'm going to be releasing a teaser trailer regarding Season 2, something I've never actually done before. So I'm really looking forward to that. I think it's going to be a lot of fun, and for those who are able to read between the lines, if you will, it's going to be quite a lot of fun. And I'm looking forward to Season 2 because we're going to go even more in depth in some of the individuals that we're covering, and we are also going to be doing my first two-part episode because one of the individuals that we will be discussing couldn't fit it all into one episode. It would have been one standalone, probably 8-hour episode. So rather than that, that's going to be our very first two-part episode. And honestly, I'm really looking forward to that one and everything else that we have coming for you guys in Season 2. But as we look to wrap up Season 1, like I said, I have some tremendous 5-star reviews that I need to touch on, as well as I had a fantastic note left to me on Facebook from the Canadian Wrestling Archive, and they said, we'd love to take this opportunity to plug one of our current favorite podcasts, Grappling with Canada. We know a lot of people call every podcast, quote, their favorite podcast when they're plugging it, but we really mean it. They do in-depth discussions about the lives and careers of prominent Canadian wrestlers and release a new podcast every month on all their platforms, with episodes on Gama Singh and the Karachi Vice, Stu Hart, Archie Goldie, and Gail Kim already. It's a great program with a lot of immediate depth for you to dive in. The latest episode, at the time of that they had heard was our previous episode, was on the legendary Rhonda Singh, the Calgarian-born Mildred Burke-trained Monster Ripper of AJW fame. Thank you guys very much over at Canadian Wrestling Archive, and looking forward to seeing what you guys do in the near future. I understand that you guys procured quite a few tape libraries, so I'm looking forward to seeing what you guys have in the near future for us, not just Canadian wrestling fans, but wrestling fans as well. Also, we had some 5-star reviews that were left on Good Pods in regards to the aforementioned Rhonda Singh episode. One from Jacob, he left a 5-star review. He says, I learned something new with every episode. Tremendous. And we also had a 5-star review from BC Hunter. He says, as always, the Taxman comes through with a thoroughly researched episode, and I walk away feeling much more educated on the life and career of Rhonda Singh. Thank you guys very much for those 5-star reviews. Like I said at the top of the program, if you guys are so kind as to leave us a 5-star written review, then I am very much inclined to read those on the next available podcast. And also, one thing that I wanted to mention that I haven't got to yet is the thanks that I want to give to a few programs that had allowed me to be a guest on their podcast earlier this year. So, all the way back around the start of the year, I was very fortunate to be a guest on Just Because Wrestling. You can find them on Twitter, JB Wrestling 1991. We had talked some Impact Wrestling and obviously where we were going with Grappling Canada at that time. I was also fortunate to be on the Total Nonstop Impact podcast. I joined them in the springtime of this year, and that was a lot of fun as well. Shout out to Trent Zaberi and all the crew over there. I was very fortunate to be a guest on the Sunday Night Army with the wonderful Jacob. And once again, if anybody out there in podcast land is looking for quick hitter episodes covering some fantastic music artists, some entertainment news, I guess you could use, and other fun things, definitely want to check out the Sunday Night Army on Twitter or all your usual social media platforms, as well as I was also a guest on the November to Remember series for Wrestling with the Truth podcast. They had me on. We talked some classic Canadian professional wrestling. I was able to school a little bit the Nightmare Jay Myers on that program, so that was a lot of fun. Shout out to them because they've been very nice to me, and it was a lot of fun doing that program, and I'm looking forward to seeing what we can do as a tandem in the future. Stay tuned. Season 2 is upon us. So, for myself, the Taxman, for my wonderful host, Bertrand Hebert. And Bertrand, if you're listening, wow, I can't say enough about what we were able to uncover for this episode regarding Pat Patterson. It was truly eye-opening for me, and I honestly hope that everybody sitting at home has a deeper appreciation for the man Pat Patterson, but as well understands a little bit more about the misreported and misrepresented, listen to me talk, you can tell we're closing up season 1, folks, aspects of Pat Patterson's lives. So I hope that you will take that information with you moving forward. If you see those who need to be enlightened, if you will, that you'll pass that information on. Because that's really what it's all about, for all of us to learn something new and further deepen our respect and knowledge for not just Canadian history, not just Canadian professional wrestling history, but really world history and the history of these individuals and their stories that we're covering each and every month. So, for myself, the Taxman, for each and every guest that I've had on throughout this incredible first year of Grappling with Canada, to all the guests that I'm going to be working with in the near future for Season 2 of Grappling with Canada, I will leave you partly, as I always do, by asking that you take care of yourselves and each other. More importantly, I wish every single one of you all the best in 2022. Please enjoy the holidays, whatever you celebrate. If you don't celebrate anything specifically at this time of year, hey, at least get together with some friends and family. That's really what this time of year is all about. I'm going to leave you, honestly, the only way that I think I can, and that is with Pat Patterson singing My Way. And if you look throughout the chapters of the Pat Patterson book, you will see the lyrics of his favorite song adorned on the chapter headings for each section of the book. And I think that that is absolutely the most perfect way that I could possibly leave everybody this night, and obviously to wrap up Season 1 of Grappling with Canada. So for myself, like I said, the Taxman, what more can I say? Take it away, Pat. Good night, everyone.
I love this song. Now the end is near, and so I face the final curtain. My friend, I'll say it clear, I'll state my case, of which I'm certain. Life that's full, I've traveled each and every highway and more. friend.